5 years ago.
What the happened? Holy bomb?
Bombs blew up at the Boston Marathon.
Suddenly, and this loud noise and a cloud of smoke.
And everybody started scattering every which way.
Lives were lost.
This doesn't make any sense.
She had such a kind spirit. She made everyone around her smile.
Hundreds were injured.
And there was a lot of crying. They realized they've lost limbs.
The deadly blasts ignited the hunt for 2 suspects. A week-long search terrorized communities.
No suspects have been arrested yet in the Boston Marathon bombing.
And tested their strength.
I'm devastated that this came to our hometown.
But the attack revealed a new courage and spirit.
The resiliency the people showed that day was amazing.
Now, a special presentation, Tragedy and Triumph. How a city rallied from horror and heartbreak.
Thanks for joining us here in Boston. I'm John Chrysos.
And I'm Marissa Bodner. Runners from around the world are in the city right now getting ready to embark on a 26.2-mile journey. The 2018 Boston Marathon is the world's oldest annual race, marking its 122nd year on Monday. 185 runners from Maine are registered for the race. The oldest is 76, the youngest is 20. The goal is to get here to Boylston Street, the final leg of the race. The finish line is an iconic spot. Spectators will cheer on the thousands of participants who are hoping to create new memories when they cross it. But for many, they'll also have memories of 2013 on their minds.
April 15th, 2013, a Monday afternoon. Hundreds of runners just finishing the major achievement of 26.2 miles when it's marred by violence. At 2:49 p.m., a pressure cooker bomb packed with shrapnel explodes. A plume of thick smoke billows into the air. Screams of horror ring out.
And we heard a big giant explosion. And wow, boom, like the ground shook. And then we heard a second one a few minutes later. And then the next thing we noticed, people were running down the street right toward us. Had their cell phones out and people were crying.
We heard 2 loud bangs, about 10 seconds apart. And we all looked at each other and said, something happened. But we didn't know what was going on.
Video surfacing days later shows the attack plotted by 2 men as they weave through the crowd looking for a spot to plant their bombs. One of the men slips off his backpack and makes a phone call. Spectators near him look left, freezing at the sound.
Everything just froze in time after that blast went off.
The man takes off just before the second blast. More images show him darting away as his victims lay scattered and bleeding. At that moment in time, hundreds of lives were changed, and the massive search begins for the terrorists who bombed the city of Boston.
The event is a happy family event. And whoever did this, stole that, ruined it.
3 people died from their injuries in the blasts. 8-year-old Martin Richard, a boy who begged for peace. 29-year-old Crystal Campbell, a restaurant manager from Medford. And Lingzi Liu, a Chinese national and Boston University graduate student. In the days that followed, law enforcement agencies worked around the clock for answers and for suspects, scouring the city for evidence. The silence and uncertainty left many anxious. As Jennifer Long shows us, stories of heroism started to filter in.
So much has happened.
I knew it instantly. I knew it right away.
But little has changed for these friends who experienced the unthinkable side by side.
You lived through this experience together.
Yeah, I had known from combat that exactly what it was.
John MIXON, an Ogunquit resident and veteran, was with Carlos and Mel Arredondo the day of the 117th Boston Marathon.
And then suddenly, in this loud noise and a cloud of smoke, everybody disappeared from the view.
Memories of the 2 loud blasts and a smoky sky are still as clear as they were 5 years ago.
I knew it right away. I knew as soon as it happened.
We showed them our story from that fateful day.
Wow.
Their accounts mirrored what was said just hours after tragedy hit Boston.
I put a couple pieces of clothing and the legs to tie the bleeding, and I asked him his name, and pretty much I told him who I was, and I concentrate basically on that single person. I reach out, touch him, let him know that I'm here, that everything's gonna be okay, you know, that kind of comfort.
This picture of Carlos and Jeff Bauman made its way around the world, cementing Carlos's spot in the history books as a hero. But both Carlos and MIXON say they never gave action a second thought.
Instead of running away, actually giving us more strength to work quick in order to evacuate.
I think Carlos and I both really never saw it as anything heroic. We just, I just thought about, you know, just doing the right thing.
In some ways, things have changed. Carlos and Mel now have a foundation to support military families. The white cowboy hat is a national artifact. Another change, instead of watching, Carlos will be running this year.
This is going to be my first legal entrance to the Boston Marathon. In the past, I sneak in from different miles. He's my witness. I run illegally with him because I didn't know how to get those numbers. But this year, I'm going to be legal.
This year, another year to remember the victims and the heroes of a day that didn't change us, but made us stronger.
While some heroes took care of the wounded, others worked to track down those responsible.
The FBI took the lead on the case, and for one agent, the victims are what kept him going.
When I go back, I think, wow, we've really gotten good at what we do.
Peter Cohenhoven is an assistant special agent in charge of the FBI's Boston office.
My memories are very vivid.
But on that Monday afternoon, he was just another spectator at the marathon with his family. They'd only moved here 3 months earlier from Philadelphia.
When I heard the first boom, and you know, my son who was with me looked, was that an earthquake? Because the building shook.
Once his family was safe, Cohenhoven ran back toward Boylston Street. One of the first things he saw, a child's body covered by a white sheet. He says Martin Richard was about the same age as his own son.
It hits you right in the gut. It hit me personally, but to see somebody do that, you know, a family there to enjoy a day, and just to take that away is, you know, it motivates you just to keep doing this job.
The investigation started right away to find the person or people responsible. Boston's Black Falcon cruise terminal was quickly filled with evidence.
I think it was the first really large case where we had so much digital evidence. I think by the end of the case, we had about 27 terabytes of digital evidence.
Cohenhoven says surveillance video from the Forum restaurant gave them their first big break. A man in a white hat who didn't flinch when the first bomb went off.
We had a computer scientist who was very diligent in looking at it, because I looked at that, you know, 50, 60 times, and I never saw anything really peculiar.
Those first 50 hours, he says, he worked straight through and would quickly learn a lot about not only the city of Boston, but the people of New England.
This is their marathon. There's a lot of pride in the Boston Marathon, and when someone messes with their marathon, look out.
It would take 3 days for everything in this case to unravel.
On April 18th, 2013, the FBI unveiled the first photos of the two suspects, a decision agents say was a tough one.
After a very detailed analysis of photo, video, and other evidence, we are releasing photos of these two suspects.
These were the two men officials were looking for, known to them only as Black Hat and White Hat.
When you're pushed out of your comfort zone, you start making mistakes.
On April 18th at 10:25 p.m., they approached MIT officer Sean Collier and shot him in the head in his patrol car.
Officer down, officer down.
I believe it was because they were trying to find another firearm. They needed another handgun, and they saw him, and they thought they had an opportunity to get his gun.
The two didn't get his weapon. Officer Collier's holster had special safety locks that wouldn't allow anyone else to remove it. The crime spree continued when they carjacked a Mercedes SUV. The driver, Dun Meng, had pulled over to send a text message. He says a man got in and flashed a gun.
He asked me, "Do you know the Boston Marathon bombing?" I said, "Yes, I know." He asked, "Do you know who did this?" I said, "No." He said, I get that.
The men took Meng on a 90-minute ride.
I thought they were going to kill me someplace in Connecticut or somewhere, you know, pretty far away from people.
They loaded homemade bombs into the Mercedes. These pictures show one of the men at an ATM where he took money from Meng's account. They then stopped for fuel and snacks. As one man went inside, Meng made a run for it. The other grabbed at him but couldn't catch him. Meng sprinted into another gas station. He pleaded with the attendant to call 911 and hid in the back until police arrived.
Please help me, please help me. They are the suspect of the marathon explosion.
Sir, what did he say when he took your car?
Please help me, please. They have guns.
With the suspects back on the run, Meng told police his SUV had a GPS system. They used it and ended up here in Watertown.
And for this community, just 10 miles outside the city of Boston, the next 24 hours turned into chaos.
Shortly after midnight on Friday, April 19th, hundreds of bullets flew. For 8 minutes, police exchanged gunfire with the suspects, who had an arsenal of guns and bombs.
They have explosives, some type of grenades. They're in between the houses down here.
It started after a Watertown police officer spotted the carjacked Mercedes and a green Honda nearby. He says one of the suspects got out and shot at him.
John fight.
This photo, taken by a resident, shows the suspects crouching behind the Mercedes. That neighbor says he saw one of the men throw a pressure cooker bomb that shook his house. Grainy photos show officers wrestling with one of the suspects after he ran out of bullets. Then those officers heard an engine rev. It was the other man in the driver's seat of the stolen SUV. He sped off, and in his haste, he ran over his accomplice who'd been wounded. He was dragged 40 feet down the street and died a short time later at a Boston hospital. 2 officers would also be injured in the gun battle. MBTA officer Richard Donahue suffered critical injuries, as did Officer Dennis D.J. Simmons. Officer Simmons died in 2014 as a result of his wounds.
In the coming hours, investigators released the suspects' names for the first time. Brothers Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev.
Tamerlan didn't make it out alive, and Dzhokhar was still on the run. Officials would issue a rare shelter in place, and with transit suspended, it would become a ghost town.
Officers spent the day combing a 20-block area of Watertown, going house to house searching for the suspect. In the early evening on April 19th, it appeared authorities had reached a dead end. Governor Deval Patrick lifted the lockdown.
But mere minutes after, gunfire is heard again in Watertown.
After getting a 911 call, police cornered the suspect in a backyard on this street.
I have a boat in my yard. There's blood all over the inside. There's a person in the boat.
Watertown resident David Henneberry called 911.
Can you look at the boat without making yourself noticeable? I can look at it right now. Okay, just let me know if anything moves or anything like that, okay?
When Henneberry peeked inside, he saw Dzhokhar Tsarnaev.
And I looked in, I saw blood all over the floor of the boat, and there's a body in the boat.
It was the tip officers had been waiting for.
We got movement. He is moving. We have movement in the boat.
Using thermal imaging, authorities confirmed their suspect was inside the boat. He was shot and wounded by police. A bloodied Tsarnaev arose from the boat. His capture, the end to the 5-day manhunt that paralyzed eastern Massachusetts. The news traveled quickly. Celebration erupted.
Today, the city of Boston, the city of Cambridge, and the city of Watertown, and many other communities can breathe a sigh of relief knowing that 2 perpetrators who caused so much pain and anguish are no longer a threat to our personal safety and to our communities.
This is our backyard. This is Boston. This is who we are.
With his brother dead, the younger Tsarnaev was brought here to Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center.
He was treated by some of the same nurses and doctors responsible for saving the lives of the innocent people he tried to kill.
Next, treating the wounded.
Between the families crying, between the patients crying, because finally they realize they've lost limbs.
The challenges hospitals faced.
From start to finish, this was literally a marathon.
Plus, remembering the victims. how the city is honoring those who lost their lives. You're watching a special presentation, Tragedy and Triumph.
After the blast, emergency rooms and trauma centers in Boston admitted more than 260 people.
Children and adults with severe injuries, fractures, and burns. At least 14 required amputations, including a Maine native.
Karen RAND-MCWATTERS watched the race that afternoon near the finish line with her friend Crystal Campbell. When the first bomb went off, RAND-MCWATTERS lost her leg. Campbell was killed.
I don't look at my life as oh gee, this terrible thing happened to me, it's over. I look at it like this terrible thing happened to me to remind me how very, very fortunate I am.
Also injured in the attack, Auburn native Michelle LaRue.
I saw the back of my leg was blown open, and I just saw flesh just hanging out of my jeans.
In surveillance video, you can see LaRue holding her leg and walking into a nearby business for help.
And I just started saying, please help me, please help me. There were some people standing there, and when I had my hands up, that's when I realized my arm was ripped open, all right here, and I had a large flap of skin and muscle hanging out, and that's when I kind of just started sinking down to the ground.
Sarah Gerard from Falmouth also survived. Shrapnel hit her in the foot and leg.
With a wide range of injuries and an increasing number of patients being rushed here after the blast, hospital workers say they had no choice but to come together.
CBS 13's Lexie O'Connor shows us how their training and teamwork helped save countless lives.
I remember hearing something about bombs, something about Boylston Street, something about we need you in the hospital.
What I remember is the closer I got, the less traffic. It was like nobody was around. It was like a ghost town.
Doctors and nurses rushed to Boston hospitals as bombs turned Marathon Monday into tragedy.
They came in 2 and 3 patients in one ambulance. That itself is pretty unusual. I think what we worried about was how many more waves of patients are we going to get?
24 of the more than 260 injured runners and spectators were sent to Beth Israel Hospital. Trauma surgeon Dr. Alok Gupta says the injuries were devastating.
The injury patterns that we saw were a lot of lower extremity injuries, a lot of shrapnel wounds, a lot of tourniquets had been applied, which I do think saved lives.
Nursing director Allison Small says her team doubled up caring for patients and their families, many trying to cope with lost limbs.
There was a lot of crying. There was a lot of emotion to the point that I reached out to social work. They would sit down and debrief with the nursing staff who desperately needed it because you can't go 110%. Continuously. You know, something's gonna give.
The hospitals weren't just busy the day of the bombings. Many patients were here for weeks, with the last patient discharged from here at Beth Israel Hospital 57 days after the bombings.
From start to finish, this was literally a marathon.
5 years later, the doctors and nurses say they're still in touch with the patients that spent weeks under their care.
That's always rewarding for the patients to come back because you feel like, okay, I'm doing what I love. It's even emotional now.
Up next, remembering the lives lost.
This park now under construction is for Martin Richard, the youngest person killed in the Boston Marathon bombing. Next, we'll take a closer look at the park and see how Boston is honoring the other victims as well.
You're watching a special presentation, Tragedy and Triumph.
Right now, marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is at the Colorado Supermax prison.
He's 24 years old and will pay for the crime with his life. After an emotionally exhausting trial, a jury sentenced him to death. He also has to pay more than $100 million to his victims. The memory of those victims will live on in the city, including here along this waterfront lot. It will soon become Martin's Park in celebration of the youngest victim, 8-year-old Martin Richard.
Brad Rogers shows us how his parents and the people of Boston have really come together to remember and honor the 3 lives lost that day.
Martin Richard, Lingji Liu, Crystal Campbell. 3 among thousands at the finish line of the 2013 Boston Marathon. The only 3 killed in the bombings.
Many people have been there. I've been there, you know, where the bombings were. I mean, and I speak for a lot of people in the city, and so I mean, it could have been anybody.
Kathleen KIRLEIS is a vice-chancellor at UMass Boston, where Crystal Campbell was a promising student in the business program.
She was loved by her friends. Just really seemed to be a very kind and giving person that's sorely missed, who, you know, we lost way too soon.
KIRLEIS is one of 11 faculty and alumni members running this year's race to raise money for what will soon be $1 million scholarship fund in Crystal's name.
It's a tragic story, but it is a testament in that people want to remember her and be inspired by a person of her character and ambition and promise.
2 of the 3 people who died the day of the bombing were from the Boston area. The third was from China. But Lingji Liu had something in common with the other 2.
She loved Boston, ready to cheer the runners on.
Lingji was a graduate student in mathematics at Boston University. Her department chair says she was a bundle of energy and enthusiasm.
She really was somebody who cared about her fellow students and her faculty. I mean, certain faculty should come by and ask, oh, hi, how are you, Professor so-and-so? I hope you're having a good day.
Megan Zaremba is one of a dozen runners out to raise nearly $90,000 for the foundation in Lingji's name. Boston University already raised $1 million in her name for scholarships to other promising Chinese students.
You know, this is something that the memory of her lives on through these other students.
Martin Richard is the youngest person to lose his life in the Boston Marathon bombing. There's a scholarship fund in his name, and his parents also set up a charitable foundation. But they in the city of Boston wanted something a little more tangible to remember him by.
They wanted to do something to truly celebrate Martin and to celebrate Boston.
It was Martin's parents who came up with the idea to create a playground on this waterfront site known as Children's Wharf.
What you're seeing right here is the foundation for what will be the focal point of the playground. It's a large wooden ship that's under construction right now.
This is the kind of place I imagine Martin would want to come.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea. It's you know, Martin's Park.
Chris Donahue led the design team. He says Martin loved a good challenge.
He liked the challenge of playgrounds and to climb, and you know, that's part of what we're trying to do here at the playground, is to create something that's fun and inviting and safe, but also challenging.
Martin's Park, expected to open this fall in Boston.
There's also a permanent memorial now on the MIT campus for fallen officer Sean Collier. Time-lapse video shows it being built on the site in Cambridge, where Officer Collier was shot and killed. A team filled with family and friends will run in his honor this year, with money raised going to a memorial fund set up in his name. If you'd like to donate to Officer Collier's foundation or any of the running teams we mentioned, we have a link on our website, wgme.com.
And we want to say good luck to all the runners who are part of this year's marathon, and thank you for joining us as we took a look back at the city that triumphed over tragedy.